Hello, this is the Daily Scoop, Day 3, Part 2. I'm sorry I ran out of video time here on my iPad. I had to readjust some things, so I'm picking up where I left off for today's Daily Scoop, talking about Joe Torre and his work that he does, and the story I want to share today, because I think it's important for men's voices to be in the room. But like I was saying, Joe, he explains in his story, he never really connected the dots till he was in his 50s. So I think it's a compelling story, and it's one worth everybody hearing. And I got a funny, and then I'll read the myths and facts in the essay. Okay, so without further ado, I am going to read the essay now that was written on December 22nd, 2010. And some of you may recall this story. Some of you may know this person. You may have worked with her. So here it goes. Making sense of the senseless death of Christine Sevilla. Last year, our community was shocked by the murder of Christine Sevilla by her husband, Tim Wells, an RIT professor. Truly, this was a senseless and tragic death. What surprises us is that Sevilla's murder has not been characterized as an act of domestic violence. When domestic violence occurs in the suburbs, it provokes an interesting response. Conventional wisdom holds that domestic violence is characterized exclusively by physical violence perpetrated by ignorant men against meek women. As domestic violence advocates who work with educated professional victims every day, the Sevilla tragedy presents an opportunity to dispel these myths. Regardless of Wells's mental status and internal conflicts, he chose to use violence towards his wife. To portray Sevilla's murder as an extension of her husband's mental status only is a convenient diversion for explaining his behavior, and it overlooks the uncomfortable truth and deeply rooted cultural dynamics about men's violence against women overall. Nationally, domestic violence impacts 1 in 4 women. And I believe the latest statistic is 1 in 6 men. I'm not positive about that. There's different statistics that come out because of same-sex relationships versus, bisexual and heterosexual relationships. So those statistics you can find online. Bottom line is 1 is too many. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence defines it as a dynamic of power and control, an epidemic affecting individuals in every community, regardless of age, economic status, race, religion, nationality, educational background. Domestic violence is not only physical assault, and for many women, physical abuse never occurs. Lesser known but more common elements of domestic violence include willful intimidation, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse, isolation from friends and family, and other behaviors that are difficult to prove and cause deep, long-term psychological harm, and as seen in this case, can escalate suddenly, leading to death. Depicting Tim Wells as a man who remained committed to his beloved wife despite an eroding internal life is one-sided. What would Christine say today if she could tell her side of the story? Nobody will ever know. Women living with abuse of any kind live in fear, shrouded in shame. They are embarrassed, and they strive to maintain a picture of perfection for those observing their life from the outside. It's hard to admit the man you love scares you, particularly if he's never laid a hand on you. It's hard to listen to your instincts when you walk around on eggshells to avoid upsetting your partner. All too often, people murdered or nearly murdered at the hands of their intimate partners comes as a shock to all who knew them. By denying the reality that Christine Sevilla was a victim of domestic violence, we condone the behavior of men and women who abuse and create barriers that prevent people in similar situations from coming forward for help. Let us take this opportunity to learn the truth and the prevalence of domestic violence and work towards breaking the cycle. Good essay. I'm so glad they published that. All right, I got 3 myths and 3 facts. And then we're going to share the Joe Torre story, and then we're going to play the harmony song. And I know this is going long. Maybe this has to count for 2 scoops, since I'm making up for scoops. Okay, here. Just checking my video. We're still going. We're still rolling, as they say. All right. Myth about domestic violence. Abusers abuse because they are angry. The truth is, domestic violence is all about control, not anger. Myth. Anger management or marriage counseling will help. Truth. This is not only misleading, but it can be a danger because it places partial responsibility on the victim, shifting it from the perpetrator. Myth. Abuse is caused by drugs, alcohol, or mental illness. Truth. These situations can exacerbate an already violent or abusive situation, but they do not cause it. Be clear. All right, some facts. Boys who witness domestic violence are far more likely to become abusers of both their spouses, partners, and their children, thus perpetuating the cycle of violence in their own homes. My friend Don McPherson, we talked about this at a conference in Boston several years ago, and he said, Annie, we've got to fight the infection. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's like an infection in our families and our societies. Another fact, girls who witness domestic violence are far more likely to become victims themselves, thus continuing the cycles of victimization. Fact, each year more than 3 million children, I think these numbers have gone up since I did these cards, 3 million children witness domestic violence in their homes. This is still the case, still a fact. Most cases of domestic violence are not reported. All right. So we're going to listen to the Joe Torre story if you're still tuning in. Like I said, I would love to meet Joe Torre sometime. I do have a kind of a little funny personal story, though, about this. I was homesick one day from work. It was like 2004 or 5. I was organizing a fundraiser at the time for the shelter, but this particular day I was homesick. And you'll know why that has anything to do with this in a minute. And Jim came home to find me in bed, snuggled up, watching TV. I'm watching Oprah, middle of the afternoon or whatever. And I'm bawling. He comes in, what's the matter? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just like, I'm watching this show and I'm an emotional wreck. This guy, he just seems so nice. Look at those beautiful blue eyes. Look at this man. This man is sitting here and he's like pouring his heart out and he's telling his story, and you know, his mom was abused and all this stuff, and he didn't know it until he was like 55 years old or something, and you know, now he's co-founded this cool, you know, organization and everything, and he's doing good things. But like, could you imagine this little boy like just like growing up and then finally, hello, connecting the dots when you're 55? And anyways, I think I should just write him a letter and just say, you know, like, our stories are the same, and I know where you're coming from, and I hear guys like you tell their story every day, and I'm with you. And Jim kind of came closer to me, and he's shaking his head yes, and he's kissing my forehead, and he's drying my tears and all this stuff, and he goes, that's good, you could, you know, maybe write him a letter and all that, but he's famous, this guy that you're that's on Oprah, honey, kissing me and like wiping my tears. So I don't know if he'll respond to your letter, but you should still write it for sure. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's famous. Who is he? And he's like, well, I'm not positive myself, but I think he's like the manager of the New York Yankees or something. And I'm like, oh God, forget it. So anyways, I wrote the letter anyways and told him my whole story. And his people mailed me an autographed baseball. So I thought that was pretty cool because we did get like $350 for it at an auction one time. It was a long time ago. But it was fun nonetheless. And the story was fun. And then, I've gotten, other things like that way. So, and then I met Don Mattingly a few years later, and that was very cool. So, okay, let me see if the film's still running, and if it is, I'm going to turn on the Joe Torre story. And Joe, if you're listening, I would love to meet you sometime. Okay, maybe you could come to Rochester and be on the Daily Scoop. All right, hang on. We're still running. Okay. So this is Joe Torre's story. You can also YouTube this. Just look for Joe Torre talking about domestic violence at the White House. All right, here we go. It's very compelling. It's precious.
Thank you, Valerie. As a youngster growing up, I'm the youngest of 5 children. There's 8.5 years between me and the next oldest. My dad was a New York City detective. Very strong, bully type. Wasn't a drinker. And I never saw him physically abuse my mom. I saw the results of it. I heard him screaming and yelling. I heard him, if he didn't like what you put on the table, throw it against the wall. And one incident stuck with me as an 8 or 9-year-old. My one sister, Ray, who was home living with my mom, I see them come out of the kitchen, my mother and my sister. My sister has a kitchen knife in her hand in front of my mom. My dad is catty corner on the other side of the table in the dining room. And he's saying, put the knife down, put the knife down. I'm in between the two. And with put the knife down and my sister wouldn't do it, he reaches into the drawer and was going for his revolver. The thing I remember doing is going over and taking the knife out of my sister's hand and putting it on the dining room table and say, there. And everything after that is very fuzzy for me. But this stuff was going on in my home. My dad used to come home in the middle of the night. He used to work late. And he had friends with him wake my mom up to cook while they played cards till daylight. And my mom would never talk about it. She never talked about it with me. I had older siblings who used to whisper, so I know in an effort to keep me from, being involved or knowing about stuff. Meanwhile, I thought because they were whispering that I did something wrong. And I grew up with a lot of guilt. Never shared it with anybody. And I really didn't tie the two together. It was basically, I was a nervous child, really afraid to go to school a lot. When I went to high school, I played hooky a lot because I was fearful of not knowing my stuff and getting punished for it. I just had very low self-esteem. I was very fortunate. I had an ability to play baseball. I had a place to hide out. And I, as I say, went through even my adult life playing baseball, knowing if I didn't do well, I felt like I was responsible for the team losing. I mean, it was weird when you go back and think about it. But these are the scars that I took from childhood into my adult life. And when my wife, Allie, she was pregnant with our daughter, Andrea, in 1995. I had just gotten the Yankee managing job. But Allie was 8 months pregnant, and she said, would you like to, we were living in Cincinnati at the time, which was Allie's home, says, would you like to go to Life Success with me? I said, sure. Well, she's 8 months pregnant. I'm going to say yes to anything she wants me to do. So we go to this self-help symposium, which I knew nothing about what was happening. About day 2 or 3, I found myself standing in front of perfect strangers crying my eyes out. and I realized I was saying things that I never talked about.